Hello and welcome to the EchoChamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today we're revisiting the Strategic Communications Unit, but just for a bit of crack, Martin. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, and the reason why Men's Health Week actually exists, because if you look at them, folks, if anybody needs to take it, man, you need to take your health seriously, mate. You're looking worse and worse.
I'm a testimony that you can live a very bad life for a very long time.
Before we introduce our guests, I need to shout out Siobhan. Siobhan DM'd me. She left us a review, but she actually said, I grabbed my pal's phone and I hit subscribe on their phone as well. That's the kind of listener you want to hear about, Martin.
Absolutely love them.
But more importantly, we are delighted to be joined in the Taoiseach by PR guru, former journalist and political commentator, and the first person I've actually ever met who's from Longford, Johnny Fallon. Johnny, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, mate.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
I know, I say this, but I did really badger you. It was it's been one of these kind of trying to pull that tooth that just wouldn't come.
Yeah, that's pretty much procrastination. I just put everything off. I get back to it.
The Dubs bet them over the weekend, so
that's it. I had to give in after that.
and it's like that. Like, where is Longford? Did you see the headline in the Cork Echo during the week? And it said, "End Dublin rule in Cork."
Yeah.
Did you see that? So that was the headline on the newspaper. Yeah. End Dublin, and I turned around and I said, "Cork, end Dublin rule in Cork. Dubliners, typical Nordies, let them stay up there." And he told people say, because we go into the match and they're going, Dublin are playing. Who are we playing this time? It doesn't really matter, does it?
No, I was actually like that yesterday. I knew there was a match coming up. I couldn't think who they were playing. And then I saw Johnny tweeting out, no point in watching this.
We kind of knew what it was before we went up. Before we arrived, but it was a good excuse to get out, because, it's interesting. Coming from Longford, you get a huge amount in the GA at the moment. There's so much talk about B championships and everything else like that, give them another competition of their own. But the truth is, the league is already there.
Yeah,
you can go and you can play in the league and you can play teams of your own level in the league. Do people actually want to go to it? No, the league doesn't have great attendances besides absolute diehard GAA fans, because really what do people want? They want a day out in Croke Park. You want to play the Mayos, Kerrys, Dublins. And yes, you get beaten, but you know what? That's how once in a while you can still dream. If you take that dream away.
I had a great time coming past Queen's, and there must have been 15 lads from Longford singing their hearts out, and it was great crack because for the most part
7 of them were Longford, the rest were Roscommon, just give them support.
but you just have to enjoy it. There's something about the GAA that we all love. I know it's tribal. But there is, this is a conversation for another day, but there is a huge imbalance in the power and, when Dublin are pulling in 5 million, and Hugh McKenna's going to listen to this now and I'm going to get told, I told you this is where it was going. When I get my hands on you, I'm going to burst you. But Johnny, I did open by saying the Strategic Communications Unit, and I do want to go backwards for a minute. That, I remember when the Fine Gael leadership contest, and I call it a contest loosely because, to his eternal credit, Leo Varadkar had it over. It was like the 6 day war with Israel. It was over before it began. The moment Pascal Donoghue was holding Leo cupcakes, that was it. It was done. But he also then, he said repeatedly, actually, I believe communications is a virtue. Now I believe communications is a means of exchanging opinions and information. And I thought, this guy, he's actually created a rod for his own back. Now you're in actually a proper PR company, Car Communications, successful PR and communications company. What was your feel and how it was delivered?
Well, I think from the outset, the delivery was all wrong. First thing you got to know about communication is, it's about the message and the audience. And, think, how do we get that message across? How you're doing it, when you're doing it, it's not something you talk about to a huge degree. You just get on and you do it. And what I couldn't understand, I think, number one, the idea of the government was good. That, we have a lot of communications across a lot of departments. Each of them has their own press advisor, their own press offices. A lot of it is disjointed. A lot of it doesn't connect up. So the idea of getting something that was going to be more strategic, that was going to clarify the message, I think that's good for the public. Mm-hmm. I think it's something the public actually would like, rather than getting confusing messages at different times. I think he employed a couple of very good, very smart people to go into the unit. But the first thing I couldn't understand was why they called it a separate unit. You know, the smart thing to do here is to employ the people, boost up the amount of money, have them doing the same job, but as part of the government press office or whatever. Once you start saying we have this elite unit over here, then immediately people go, why do we need this spin unit? Why do we need it? Instead, you bring people in, you work the message, you do something and you have a positive impact on communication. It's the impact you're looking for, not the announcement of the special unit. Yeah. That was never doing anything. So I think from the start, it became more about the fact that they had a unit than what the output of this unit was going to be. And therefore, it did very quickly become the opposition were quick in to start saying this is spin, this is purely to sell a good message. Whether or not it was or wasn't is beside the case, because what people looked at was they've set up a unit costing 5 million. Really, he should have brought people in, should have organised it and said, right, this is our unit within here. Yeah. Governments have always had a big difficulty with how they communicate. And, you know, it could have been potentially good. But, you know, interestingly, it's been disbanded. But all the people are still there. Yeah. They've all just gone around to different. So perhaps they've now gone back to what should have been the original plan is, we'll all be here. We'll all do things in a more strategic fashion. But we're not going to have a big poster over our heads saying, come and kick us.
Yeah, and that was it, because it was, I think you've hit on it there, Martin. We've had conversations about this before, where he talked about almost, as you said, the elite unit. Like we have the military on the ground, we have the ground troops, these are the SAS. And it really did just give people, because if you come out with any sort of message whatsoever, you had every right to be politically, question it and say, who's speaking now? Is it Leo Varadkar or is it John Concannon? And by all it, like we had Oliver Callan here, and Oliver Callan was talking about John Concannon and his charisma and his ability to actually market things. You know, these guys are really good at what they do. There's no question of that. But we're spending 4 times more than any government in the state's history on communications, and they got it wrong at the outset, I think. Mm-hmm.
But why is it called communications? Why not just call it spin? Because what they're doing is spinning. It is a spin.
And I suppose, there's always, this is always a great debate when you're within it, because, if you were to talk to any government, throughout history, the first thing they'll say to you is, look, we can't get a message through. As soon as we tried to tell everybody, Varadkar, you could wheel in any minister now here into your podcast, and if you got mics on and they said to them, look, tell us, what is the toughest thing to do? They'll say to you, to a man or woman, they'll all say the same thing. I do lots of good stuff. I do lots of good work. I open lots of things. I make a lot of things happen. None of it gets picked up in the media. They only focus on the bad news. And that's just part of life. But politicians and ministers will always be obsessed with this fact that I'm doing all this good stuff over here, but nobody covers it. So therefore they say, right, I need to have some kind of way of getting that communication together and convincing people, let me tell you the good things I'm doing, don't always listen to the bad things. And then the perception of that, of course, will always be, you just want us to look at the good things, you don't want to hear the bad things. So you always have 2 different blocks looking at it. One that says, look, we need to focus on all the things you're getting wrong. The other that says, we need to focus on all the things we're getting right. And in the middle, you have people who are just trying to decipher it all. They're trying to say, well, on which side is it?
It's a very artificial world to live in. I mean, I'm comparing it to other jobs. And when you're in another job, you say, look at all the good things I did over there. Most people go, yeah, well, that's your job.
Yeah, that is the problem. When things go right, but look at, it's the same. If you even broke it away, all government services even have the same thing. I remember talking one time to a government department where I was running a program with them, and, people came in, they were saying, oh, look, when people arrive at the desk and they're difficult people to deal with, and, then it's hard, and then, but, we put through so many people and we've done this right and that right. And I said, look, the problem is, if I were to walk up to any government department tomorrow and I have a form that has to be filled, if I walk up to the desk, I expect, look, I'm going to run in here, I'm going to hand in the form, they're going to stamp it, they're going to give me back whatever else I get back, and I'm going to be on my way, collect the kids from school and home. If that's what happens, and I go in, it's all done, I'm happy, I go off, collect the kids from school, I don't think anything about it, because that's the way it should work. On the other hand, if I go in and as I approach the window, somebody says, no, you need to take a ticket. And the ticket says 175. And I realise I'm going to be here for half an hour. And then by the time I've queued up, someone goes, oh, you're actually in the wrong queue. You should have been in the queue over there. You'll have to take a ticket again. I'm getting more furious then as it goes on. And I'm going to tweet about it. I'm going to send a letter about it. I'm going to complain about it. I'm going to give out to everybody about it and say the whole system's a shambles. So when things work in any level of government, we kind of accept that's it, that's your job. Things should just work. When they don't, they're news. But of course, if you're on the other side of the delivery end of that, which say from ministers down to public servants who are on the delivery side, they look at it and go, it takes an awful lot of work to make it go right. So they expect an accolade when it doesn't go right, and when they don't get it, they're very upset about not getting it. And that's why they get into this head-to-head then about whether it's fair or not.
There's a phrase I've used a few times now, Martin, and I must credit the female lecturer who came up with it, but she said, propaganda is what my opponents do, and persuasion is what I do. Okay, and I think that's a lovely way of putting it, because everything is like, we're deeply cynical. Yeah, Martin. And
go on. Can't accuse me of being cynical.
No, but I said deeply cynical. but the reality is, when you're deeply cynical of those things, we kind of parse phraseology. I heard Mairead McGuinness say on the radio to Sean O'Rourke yesterday that she said the job was to make sure that Brexit would have no impact on the Irish economy. I thought that's a falsehood, because Brexit has already had an impact on the Irish economy. We're already seeing an entrenchment, and there's not one outcome that any economist will tell you that's positive in a net way for Ireland in terms of Brexit. And I just thought, okay, you can't start from a false premise. Now, that was just her phraseology, and I'm deeply cynical. Okay, I tend not to give the benefit of the doubt in that scenario. But when I see things like, the 5 million that was put into the budget after Taoiseach Varadkar saying that it was going to be cost neutral.
Yes.
I go mad. I go apoplectic, because then I make the false equivalence of how many social houses was that, Leo?
But I think you're right to make those connections. I think you're right to do those comparisons. We looked at the European of the Year award that came out, was it yesterday, the day before, which is basically Enda Kenny awarding himself an award, and this process, or this thing that they have, costs 200 million a year, and you're looking at it and going, oh my God, 200 million a year, you've built X number of houses, you've opened X number of beds. 386
houses, I believe, was the actual total number of houses built by the state last year, and that was from Lorcan Sir's housing conference today.
You say we're deeply cynical, but I think Irish people are deeply cynical. I think that the referendum has shown us that you can pile money into advertising campaigns, but you can't beat the on-the-doorstep, face-to-face, person-to-person account. You can't beat that. That travels further.
Yeah, I think, real stories, real, messages that resonate with people. People have to feel in anything that you're saying to them that there's something in common with the message, that they have an affinity to it, they can understand it. And one of the problems I think politicians in particular suffer from is that it is very easy to become detached. It's very easy. It's quite a difficult job, from the point of view of staying, people talk about, they're detached, and, as if it's just becoming elite. And it's not a case that they ever want to become elite. They do see a lot through the constituency offices. They're probably more embedded in that than most other countries have at their politicians, because they do see things at that level. But at the same time, it's very easy to be caught up all the time on big picture stuff. And after a while, 100 million, 200 million becomes just small fry, becomes just, well, we have to allocate that here and we have to allocate it there. And to actually stay grounded is a very difficult thing. Stay grounded in the way that the ordinary person is going to look at this and say, hold on, how are you connecting that to me? What's the impact on me of you spending that, or you coming out with that, or this throwaway statement that they do? But, that's communication, as you say, going back to it. That's always the challenge. Now, could we be cynical about it? Yeah. But then, look, I go back to my old mentor, Albert Reynolds, when he took over as Taoiseach. One of the things he felt was wrong in the office at the time was that there was this confrontational atmosphere, or had been, between Haughey and the media. And he said, look, Albert had this great, naive, perhaps, view that, look, I'm just going to go out. I'll tell people to have questions. Let's answer them. So he announced that he was going to have a press conference. Absolutely, all the media in, ask what you want, 1 hour every week. Now, in today's world, it's absolute insanity to think of anybody having access to the Taoiseach for a full hour to ask anything you want, go anywhere you want. Now, it didn't actually last that long because everybody said to Albert at the time, Albert, this is a terrible idea. This really, you do not walk out. And Albert's view was, no, it'll be fine. It'll be grand. They'll get to know me. I'll get to know them. We build up a bit of trust. That doesn't happen. The first word you get wrong is front page headlines. And it's no understanding of, the context. We knew we were chatting to him at that point, or we know he wasn't minding at that. He didn't have the details around him. So, he starts going out, and then these stories get picked up, and there's more reason to throw stuff at him. So Sean Dykeman eventually is quietly beginning to move around and say, Albert, you can't do that this week. We've got another appointment, and gradually starting to move this out to stop it happening, because letting a Taoiseach out in front of the media won't have that understanding.
But then again, we had Enda Kenny who told these man with 2 pints stories time and time again.
Armies at the ATMs.
And the media gave him pretty much a free pass.
They didn't. Not all of them. Not all.
I think that, and that's the thing. Like, there's always a perception. I'll go back to that point about whether the media gives him a hard time or not. I mean, one thing to note with Enda, I think that was difficult. Enda could be quite good at times. Certainly 1-to-1, Enda was a good communicator, and he's good, with the handshaking, working the room, very personable guy, very strong in that space. Then suddenly, I always felt the handlers around Enda actually they made so much of a big deal about how they were holding him back that they almost crushed his spirit. I always felt he didn't have the confidence when he went out in front of the mic, and I think that was because he was never allowed really let go. Whereas you met him 1-to-1 and he was really, really strong. Now, I do think the problem for Enda was as well that he was told, which we mentioned at the outset, it needs to be relatable. People like some kind of story. They like an example. But of course, what Enda started doing then was, using hypothetical stories, that could have worked, but they just weren't believable. Yes. I mean, the one that always took out for me was when he, in the Dole on one occasion, he talked about how they were pressurising him about, why the economy wasn't working or why things weren't happening in the economy. He said, look, I was in the Taoiseach's office the other night and the phone rang, and it was a man from Australia who rang me up to thank us for the work we're doing. You think, it works fine for a second until you think, well, now, why was Enda just wandering around? How come he picked up the phone and went, hello, Taoiseach's office? And it's like the one person who gets through to the Taoiseach is saying a compliment.
Well, I did give out his number at one stage. I've quite a few people around him all around the world.
But he did. But it was those moments when, like, literally, when he tells a story, and he tells this tale, and it's a tale, and you look at it and you go, it's a lovely fantasy, and it was a fantasy because apocryphal stories are all over politics. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's just the nature of the game. But Enda had a terrible habit of, once he'd actually dipped his toe, he just kept, he'd fall back into the trope again, whether it was at the armies at the ATM or as you said, the man with 2 points who we met referred to.
We all parties. That was kind of a one that really smacked at Irish people very hard.
Well, it actually, I think a lot of people swallowed it for a little while. A lot of people swallowed it for a little while and thought, there is a part of us that thinks we kind of did deserve it. There is an element that thinks we did deserve it, Martin. And it's a small percentage, but my God, did it diminish over time. And like we've seen the arguments, and then and then it became, if you remember when water, because water was a huge thing. They can diminish water all they want. They lost nearly half their seats on the basis of the water debacle. And when the water kicked off, Enda came up and he said, let me be clear and let me be certain. And he kept repeating that phrase, let me be clear and let me be certain. And then he'd follow it up with going, and it's going to cost this and it's going to cost that. And everyone said, no. We were clear, we were certain. Not paying,
I think the telling thing on the water was, and it was Enda who coined it, was that it was more than about just water. And he very quickly copped on to this is just more than about water. And
that's what I'm saying to you. It was a tipping point too.
That kind of brings us on to where we are now. We're in a slow bicycle race heading towards an election. We have Fianna Fáil, whether the referendum translates into votes, and they don't normally translate into votes, but in this instance, Fianna Fáil are seen as male, stale and pale. Fine Gael are getting accolades, and some of it's very deserved. Sinn Féin were very heavy on the ground. They really, really pushed. They were out campaigning. Labour's a spent force, and then we have quite a few different mix-ups on the left coming through. Where do you see it all? Now, you've done this before, Johnny. You've seen all this before.
You've built from the ground. You are the grassroots.
You've predicted these things. So where are we heading?
I think we're heading into an election where, I wouldn't be placing a huge amount of stock right now on what's happening in opinion polls. I think you're heading into an election that is going to see a huge shift once that election kicks off.
Okay.
And I think either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, I think either one of them will probably do very well in that space. I think they'll make it about each other. They'll fight hard with each other. And one or other of them could go up 5, 6, 7 points. And if they do, they may be within touching distance of some kind of coalition with Sinn Féin, Labour, Social Democrats, everything else in there, if they could get that working. Or, even a two-party coalition with Sinn Féin for either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, I think is still an option on the table if the seats fell that way.
What about Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael? Why are we looking away from the one coalition that is bound to happen at some stage?
I'll tell you, I always get this, because we got it before the last election too, and the pressure of, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, just let them get in. But, first thing you got to realise is what's in it for them. Political parties at the same time are about survival. Yeah. They're about knowing their market. They have a reason that they exist themselves. And, if you don't believe in a political party, it's easy to kind of say, could bundle all them parties over together. There's people on the right look at the left wing of Irish politics and go, why don't they just bundle all those left wing parties together, form one party, and it'll all be grand. But when you actually talk to them people on the left, you realise, no, there's actual real differences, and there's reasons those parties want to stay as individuals. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are no different. They have their reasons, particularly personality reasons, that they won't get on. And one of the things I think is, first of all, there's nothing in it for them. If Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael go into government, all they do is open up a market for some other party, be it Sinn Féin, be it who used to be Labour the last time, but whoever is in that space. They just open up opposition space. Now, if you're in the business of promoting your party as a strategist, you're not sitting there opening up the market. I mean, Coca-Cola don't go, well, do you know what? We should allow Pepsi have some of the market over there.
So it's a deliberate hedging off of the opposition.
It's a deliberate hedging off, but it's also then, to follow on from that, I would also say that it's a government that wouldn't last. I think it is a government that would be incredibly unstable. I would actually say it would be a bad government.
But they've been basically in coalition for 2 years now. They've been basically in coalition. Now, the only difference I see between that and a proper coalition government is Fianna Fáil have no ministers, and it must be a sickener to be almost in government and have no ministers. It must be a sickener.
Do you know, I'm not so sure for Fianna Fáil it is, because you got to remember Fianna Fáil are coming from a slightly different perspective on this. Fianna Fáil are a party that has had such domination for so long, particularly in the 15 years or so leading right up to 2011. This is a party that's had their fill of having ministers and portfolios, particularly their grassroots, who are not in this because it's no good. Yes, your guy gets the car and gets the ministry and gets whatever. It's nice for the guys at the top. But when you go below that, there's nothing in it for them. So they've had their fill. They've had lots and lots of ministers. They've had lots and lots of the perks of office. They're also brutally aware, because of the way things ended in 2011 and because of that long period in government, that being in government is no cakewalk. You are going to get abuse. There's no good days in it, only bad days of abuse happening all the time for you. So there's a long fatigue in Fianna Fáil about that. They also then are very much aware that by 2011, they suffered this enormous hemorrhage that almost destroyed the party. And you have now a group of individuals in that party who are looking at this thinking, well, we were nearly wiped out. You know, you don't go and you know, have to be on life support for a while and then go at the first opportunity, I'm getting back into the ring with the heavyweight champion and I'm going to, you know, go 15 rounds again. You have to at some point say, now what about long-term survival here? And Fianna Fáil are still in that mode. So I think they would happily, if they could get a situation, I think, where Fine Gael were in opposition supporting them in government, Fianna Fáil would trade for that.
So they do the about face. Yeah.
And that's possible too, although it will require a change in the opinion polls, and that might happen during an election, but it would require it certainly now because Fine Gael are building up a good lead. But would they actually be happy? You know, there's a distance you can put between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael where they can still hold their nose and sit at opposite side of the room, you know, and keep a government in place. To actually lock them in the room together and say, you are in there, I just don't see it lasting. The personality differences, the deep-seated hatred that exists between those two parties.
Do you not think there's even, what you say about that deep-seated hatred is even doubly so for Fine Gael and Sinn Féin?
No, actually, I think what you have for Fine Gael is an ideological hatred there, you know, in that it's always kind of going to be, you know, well, Sinn Féin are, and there's no doubt, you know, Fine Gael do not want to be, but you got to remember that in 2007, when faced with what looked like an unending, you know, Bertie Ahern has got another successful
Emperor Bertie.
Enda was willing, along with Phil Hogan, to try ask Sinn Féin, come along guys, if we all got together, can we beat Fianna Fáil? And that was consideration. So there's also a thing, look, for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, there's also another strategy behind that. If you get much and all as they don't want to maybe agree, or there's elements, and there are elements in Fianna Fáil that hate Sinn Féin as well, but if you brought Sinn Féin into government, then can Sinn Féin remain as the party that, you know, is untouched by government?
I think there's an element of where we've David Cullinan in last week, and he said to me that they wouldn't be Labour. But I think there's an element, as you say, another strategy there is if we got them in and they ran on a programme for government on the basis of we won't do X, Y, and Z. Well, let's see them implement X, Y, and Z, and let's see what happens. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm just saying it's definitely at some level a strategy that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have to have discussed and actually thought to themselves, this is going to be our this is going to be a part of it if we have to do it, because ultimately we don't know. Sinn Féin have never been in power. They've never legislated, and we would like to see the colour of their money.
Yeah, you know, the thing about it is, if you're in one of those big parties, you're looking for any new party that comes in to eventually have to make the decision. And look, no matter what, government is about decisions. It's not about anything else, only decisions. Somebody is going to dislike, as soon as you make a decision, somebody dislikes that position. Whether it's the people over here, it doesn't matter, but people dislike it first. And what Sinn Féin will eventually find, if they are in government, is, with the best will in the world, they could be a very good government party. They could form a very strong government, and they could do wonderful things, but they will not cause a revolution by being in government. They will possibly be a very good political party, but the moment they walk in that door, they accept that they are another political party. The idea of the revolutionary thing, and I think there's still some slight aura that, you know, is special to Sinn Féin about that. They still have that kind of thing, I think, for a lot of people, that, you know, look at, there's that romanticism of them being different. The minute they go into government, they will lose that. And I think Sinn Féin, though, are at a point where they're beginning to realise themselves, look, is the revolution ever coming? Because if it's not coming, then we risk losing all the progress we've made by staying in opposition eternally, when we could become, yes, just another political party, but perhaps a very good political party. And that's where their strategy has to be.
I think now and after the referendum, there's been added focus or added foresight towards the north. And I think if you're talking revolution in this country, and again, you're not talking people taking up arms and fighting, you're talking about making a change. The change to United Ireland is probably closer than it has been in generations. It's kind of tangible at the moment. We're almost there. Sinn Féin's the only party that has people north and south.
It is, and that's it's always been a big benefit for them in terms of selling the All Ireland, market. Saying to them, we're the only All Ireland party here. It's also going to be difficult for them. If you're a strategist looking at it at the moment, you would again say, look, guys, we have to be really careful about this, because the only way you start to grow that means Sinn Féin have, and one thing Sinn Féin have done very well is that they've managed that transition to the south. But you did see figures like Gerry Adams coming south. Martin McGuinness running for the presidency. If he had won the presidency, he would have been president of the south. And the risk is, and it's a very real risk, they now have a leader from the south. And I think the challenge for them, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen or that they're not up for the challenge, I think they're well aware of it, but there is a really big challenge of keeping those two sides together. When you have Gerry Adams, or someone like Gerry Adams, I think it's very easy for him to hold it together. And I know why Sinn Féin stayed with Gerry Adams for so long, even though other people said, he's not great in the economics and all these kind of accusations. But Gerry could keep people in Northern Ireland happy. They don't understand Gerry gets us. I think that's increasingly difficult with Michelle O'Neill and with Mary Lou MacDonald. There's going to be a certain amount of north-south tension that is naturally going to develop over the next 5-6 years within the party, that they may well manage very well, but they do have to manage it because it's not the same dynamic anymore.
But is there not a pressure, we'll say, on Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael now to go north?
Fianna Fáil have always had this kind of thing where they've flirted with it every so often. They've had meetings, they've had commons and that set up in parts of the north. Is there a pressure on them? No, I said certainly not on Fine Gael, because they will say, as always, they'll have been the more, I suppose, they've always been more of the opinion it's a separate jurisdiction, that this is part of Britain, and we'll always respect that, and they always respect the unionist view on it more. Fianna Fáil, there'll be a little bit of pressure, looking north, but again, until Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael actually get a sense that, a united Ireland actually is going to happen, and when that happens, you move into it, or you start thinking about moving in, possibly. At the moment, I think for both of them, they would look at it and go, yes, it's possible.
Oh, I think they've missed the boat on this one.
I don't know, because, I'll tell you, one of the things I find fascinating about Northern Ireland, I do, and I love going to Belfast. Belfast is one of my favourite cities, and when you travel north...
It's the only other city in Ireland, actually, when you think about it. What else is there?
But they have a great, and I love, even the rural areas in Northern Ireland. It's a beautiful, beautiful province. But there's something about it that I'm still unconvinced. And I say this as somebody who would love to see, I would consider myself a nationalist from that point of view. I would love to see United Ireland. I do think culturally it'll be a very hard thing to ever achieve, because I think even among nationalists as they look south, this is not, the promised land. The Republic as they see it is not. And I don't think as they will watch, if Sinn Féin were to go into government in the south, I think there's a lot would look down and go, is that the government we want to be part of? Is there a future for Northern Ireland? I think we're a little bit further away than the call for a referendum on it would suggest, because I think there's a lot of trust issues for people. I think both nationalist and obviously unionist who will be opposed to it, but I think even for nationalists looking south, the cultural change to suddenly turn over those roads, those shops, everything else to our system in the Republic, a system that I think they will all look, as we all around here look and go, it's an imperfect state. It doesn't really work great on this. The health service, isn't like the NHS. All of those things. When you get down to brass tacks and you start saying to people, that's what you're doing. Will they give it? Will they take it on that thing? I think it can become a bit like the Scottish referendum.
Well, the Scots they're talking about going for another referendum, and in the very near future, the Scots are talking about it. I can't see a Scottish referendum happening without a border pull.
Yeah, and look at it's possible. But the outcome of them, I would still think, is very much in.
Well, I kind of have. I understand what you're saying about the head, the heart, the conflict between the two. But I think it's the pocket that decides it. I think it's the pocket, and if your land up north is worth the equivalent of 10,000 an acre, because you're getting your EU checks in every month, and then all of a sudden it's worth 6,000 an acre, I think that's what makes the big difference. And I think it's the landed class that will make the difference.
I mean, there is. It's and Brexit has made all of these problems a lot more clear, in it, and the lack of the EU in Northern Ireland could be the game changer in it. I think that it will take a bit of time. It'll take a bit of time for people to actually feel it and sense that they want to go into it, and possibly even quite a bit of time for people in the Republic, because I think we also make this assumption. I have no doubt. If I were offered the chance to vote in the morning, that's what I'd be voting for. It's the way I was raised in the Republican dream, and you say, well, that's what we want. That's our aim, is to have a united Ireland. But I still think there's a lot of people out there, down here in the Republic too, who will be looking at it going, I don't know if I want it. I don't know if I want to take on the North. I don't know, can we afford it?
Yeah, and I think that phraseology, to take on the North, there is that, and it's a really uninformed view for the most part, I have to say, because they kind of go, oh, do I want the headache? And you're going, well, no, the headache is how it is now, because we have an imperfect state where we have an actual one island, where we have this, because of dint of history, that we don't have a proper cohesion between both sides, and that doesn't make sense. You just now. Then again, I'm an open borders loon, so I'm a real freedom of movement kind of guy for people. I think if corporations can up and move sticks, I think people should be able to up and move sticks. But but at the same time, I do think there's a battle for hearts and minds that has to happen up there, because you are right. The question that needs to be asked is, better the devil you know. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you have that conversation with people, they will always say, there's a reason people say hills far away are greener, because they play it safe. And if you're going into a conversation like that, like what happened with the Scottish referendum, if you remember that in that independence referendum, all the momentum was with Leave.
Yeah.
And on the morning it happened, it just was overwhelmingly put to bed by the people who said, let's play it safe. And all of the young people felt disenfranchised and let down and all the rest of it. So you don't want to jump too quickly into a border poll and then find that you haven't done it, you haven't sold it properly.
I think you have to give people assurance. There's no point of us here in the Republic deciding, oh yes, just on a whim, we'll have a vote and we'll bring Northern Ireland into the Republic, and that they can vote on that same whim too. If it gets to that, I think quite rightly people in Northern Ireland would say, okay, I want to be part of the Republic, but I want to know on what basis I'm becoming part of the Republic.
Yeah, there are details.
And I just think at a level we haven't even considered that. So,
but that's where I think that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are behind the curve on this. I think the game is moving much faster than their anticipated.
Hang on. Can I just give? Oh God, this is hard. Can I give Leo a bit of credit for his? He went up to the Orange Order. He went to visit. He went to what we were laughingly calling Provo Fest, where he took abuse from both sides for his visits, and then he actually poked him in the eye by visiting a gay bar in Belfast city centre on his way home. Now, you have to say that was well done. Like for if you could do 6 hours of carnage anywhere, you did 6 hours of damage. And
it's one of the interesting things, because out of Brexit, we always do have a sense in Ireland, and I firmly believe it's part of Fine Gael's positive ratings at the moment is Brexit.
Now, it is, yeah.
The only question or caveat I'd put on that is that you can have these wonderful ratings, you can have huge popularity off the back of that. It's the kind of popularity that always evaporates the first week of an election campaign, because nobody cares about Brexit anymore. They care about their hospital, they care about, their job on their doorstep, and that becomes a different debate. But one thing I will say, I think it's been, Leo Varadkar has very strongly gone out, he's taken on the British, and, go back to the days of Charlie Haughey. When Charlie was in trouble, he wrapped the green flag around himself, and then we were all very Republican and all out. Charlie's, got to tell Thatcher, what's what, and if it wasn't for Charlie, no one would tell Thatcher that, and therefore, it gave him that boost, and that was his safe territory. He always drifted back into this heavy Republican stance, sometimes at the cost of progress, sometimes at the cost of making progress.
That's the fear around Brexit, because economically, making sure the Brits get the worst deal possible is not a great idea for Ireland. Like, it's just not a great, I know at some point the EU looks at it in terms of trade, in terms of cold hard cash, and in terms of Ireland, what we take off the table with our corporate tax rate, and they say economically, Ireland is an easier can to kick than
we're not making
the city
with our economic policies. We're not.
But I'll tell you, Brexit and how the EU is part of, like, I mean, I've said for a long time that there's a complete problem in the Brexit process, and the problem is actually Ireland, in that I've always believed we're the Achilles heel in Europe. Again, come back to Albert Reynolds' side, he once said to me, you never sit down unless you can afford to walk away. And when you walk into a negotiation, the biggest trump card you've got is being able to say to somebody, no deal. Yeah. You're tough. Now, the EU is in a position when it sits down with Britain to say to Britain, all right, guys, here's the deal. You can't have everything without having this. And if Britain says, oh, well, no, we still want that, but we don't want all these things, that eventually which of them can walk away on paper, the EU is the one that can walk away and go, right, guys, you want borders, you want trade war, you want that, fine. Yes, Europe will take a hit, but Britain's going to take a far bigger hit. The bigger bloc over here, it's going to win. The problem for Europe is that Ireland is sitting in here in the middle. And Ireland has this view then of saying, yes, we're with Europe. Britain has to have sense. They have to cop on. I think, and I could be totally wrong, but I've believed for a long time that the Brits are not as foolish about Ireland as they lead everyone to believe. I think the Brits know quite well what they want to do with Ireland, which is to leave Ireland saying the EU game, having this over and back with Ireland, about it. But eventually, if it comes down to the EU saying to Britain, right, guys, that's it, we're going to walk away, Ireland is going to be the one sitting in the corner going, now settle down, lads. Settle down. Come back to the table now. Because Irish people are very much, we love to see Leo going out there kicking the Brits. We love to see him, doing all that kind of nationalist stuff. We love to see us tell Britain, look, you guys can't have it every way. You need to cop on. But then as soon as you say to them, do you know what? In order to teach the Brits a lesson, if they won't agree to the rules of the Union, then that's it. The border goes up.
Yeah.
And then Irish people go, oh, no. The one thing there can't be is a border.
All Scousers.
We can't have a border at any cost. The border must be prevented. So that means that the EU has to come back at some point and say, well, okay, we've got to get some solution.
Well, I tell you then what happens then. And we've had this conversation off Mike, Martin, and it's kind of, there's an awful dystopian version of this, which is very practical in its dystopian version. You can turn around to Ireland and say, okay, guys, you're the good Europeans. Thanks for fighting the good fight. The EU is going to do a deal with the UK, and because your east-west trade is such, you can have the same trade deal that the UK have, just to keep the border in the sea, and you guys can work away, and the border will then be in the English Channel as such. And we will be still within the EU, still have freedom of movement of our people, but our trade will be, our trade deal will still give us this. Now, how do you legislate for that? How do you do it? It's a headache. It's a nightmare. But it's the sort of thing where the EU would go, that might be worth doing, because Ireland's only 2% of our economy, and the UK maybe 12%,
Yeah, or you could hit an absolute nightmare scenario, which is if you went and said, look, Brexit goes to worst case of all, which is, let's go back to the days of the banking crisis, where Europe then eventually gets a bit frustrated and says, look, let's call Ireland in. Say, Ireland, look, we want you with us. Yeah. We want you, but we have to tell the Brits they're going to get stuffed. And it's their fault the border is going up. But the border is going to go up. And we need to eyeball them and tell them, unless they agree to this, they get a border. Now, will you stand with us? And I think Ireland is going to be caught in a very difficult point at that point, because at that point, Ireland and Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, it's still Taoiseach when it happens, will have to sit in there and go, okay, I'm going to walk in and tell Britain, if there's a border, you're going to cause that border, but border so be it, because we're walking out of here. We're on the side of Europe. He will take enormous flack at home here in Ireland. Enormous flack for that position. And therefore we end up back at that stage where it's like the banking situation, where Europe either says to us, well, guys, you're either with us
or a bomb will go off.
Or we'd say to, they could say to us, well, lads, if you really want to keep that with Britain, yes, you were entitled to leave too. But, the only way we cannot give Britain the kind of deal it's looking for without eyeballing them down.
But we've known that's not going to happen.
Yeah, but the difficulty, I think, for us is that we haven't really yet appreciated that border may happen, and it may be us that causes the border. And it may be Britain sitting there going, well, we wouldn't have a border if you'd agreed to our plan, and our plan was just give us access, we'd all be happy. But that at some point it may be Ireland that has to go, and it is only at that point that I think Britain may back down when they see, right, the border is actually going to happen.
Why would they back down?
The only thing I think about Britain that would have, possibly caused that is that fear of the absolute out-and-out possible trade war with the EU, that kind of thing that might make people go, do you know what, this is getting crazy. We had Donny fighting with the Canadians this week.
I mean, who looks at Justin Trudeau and says he's not gorgeous and then has a go at him? I mean, what is that all about? Martin's got listen. No,
you're still throwing my eyes up there, and I'm just like, oh my God, stop saying this.
But there are all those challenges within those kind of negotiations. So at the moment, I just see Brexit as being one of those difficult ones for the government, because I think we're in the comfortable stage where we're kind of brick bashing. Yeah, and that's always popular, but it's going to get tougher.
It was lucky for Leo Varadkar in a sense, in that no matter who was Taoiseach at the present moment in time, they have to take the same line. Mm-hmm. There is there's no alternative. Leo can't take a different line to Micheál Martin would take to Mary McLuhan, Mary MacDonald would take. There's no different line.
The only thing that I think that the Irish government could have and should have done, or maybe are doing, for all I know, deep down in the bowels of the Irish government and in secret negotiations with the EU somewhere, but I think going old school Irish approach to the EU would be to say, right, let's assume this is happening. Let's assume that we are going to end up in a situation where a border is going to go up. That's where you want to be sitting down with Macron and Merkel and the other leaders and going, right, guys, how much money are we getting for that border going up? Yeah. Where is not that legal backstop that Britain, where's the financial backstop that you guys are going to fund us out of here? We want to return to structural funds. We're going to need everything. We are now in a completely unique situation.
I said the same thing.
What have we got?
I said the same thing about PESCO. I said, look, if you're gonna go into a European army, at least get the moolah for doing it. At least get the money. Make it worth your while to do it. If you got to sell out, make it worthwhile. Don't sell out for a promotion. Sell out for the big action.
Or a photo op.
If you're going to do it for the big thing.
Well, there is, if it all came down to a very difficult situation, you have to say Ireland is in a completely unique situation of European countries when that would happen, given its island status and everything. And that then does just create, what are we doing? But now, that's not to say that if that is happening, or if that is talked about, that the EU aren't saying somewhere, we can do this, but we cannot talk about it.
A wipe out of the national debt. Would we? Would we all say, can we put up with a border for a couple of years? Of course we can.
It's like, it goes back to, and I know it was controversial when I said it before, and I say it, I've always said it, at the time of the financial crisis, when there was so much talk of the IMF and the thing, and people are saying, that's it. We fought in 1916, and that's it. Our sovereignty's just gone overnight. When the IMF left, there weren't people out really. Fine Gael thinking Labour bought into it a bit. They thought people would be on the streets giving them hurrahs for winning back our independence. The truth was, and I always said it, did any of those who died in 1916 or 1920, did they die in a ditch thinking, I'm dying for the right to raise money on the international bond markets? No. They used a currency that was a derivative of sterling for until the 70s. They were quite happy to adapt any British systems they could. Freedom was about something totally different than the monetary.
Oh yeah, but you got to understand what's our 10-year bond rate. That's what
back then. That was what we talked about.
Grabbing your musket and running up and saying, "What's the 10-year bond rate?" No,
it's been an interesting chat with you, Johnny. I know you were very involved in setting up Commons when you were
back in the day,
a younger man, shall we say, before you had kids and wife and the whole lot. Any sign you're getting back into the political arena again?
No, I can't ever see it. I think like anything, politics is one of those games. And I say to people all the time, it is a really, really tough game. It is a very, very tough game. You give up your life. You do give up any quality of family life. It's a bug that gets you when you're in there. You live for it. if I were involved in politics, it would be an absolutely all-consuming passion to be involved in. And I gave a lot of my life, gave all of my young life to it. You know, I'll tell this story that I was 21 years of age and I was looking for votes. And I was friends with PJ Maher at the time. I was up at the Gresham Hotel and he was functioning late on in the night. There were about 20 old men left standing around and PJ was sitting on a couch and I went over and said to him, you know, PJ, how are you getting on? And he said, Johnny, sit down here. And he sat down beside him and he looked around the room and he says, Johnny, I know what I'm doing here, but what in God's name are you doing here? And I said, I'm sure I have to get a few votes, PJ, you know, it's a long road going for executive as a just 21. He said, you should be out on the town looking for young ones with big boobs.
Well, that sounds like highest man in place, all right.
Yeah, so it's slightly inappropriate, maybe comment, but it was the kind of thing where, as I say, from my young life, right, the amount of things I missed out on, the amount of places I didn't go, the amount of time I lost out for it. I value it because it was a great experience. It gave me the career I had. But, you know, that was kind of up to that point. To get back into it now and to start saying, yeah, I've run, you know what, I've known so many good people in politics over the years, so many people who worked hard, tried hard, did their best. Did they get the credit they deserved for it?
But then again, you are in Longford. You only have to get 7 votes to talk
and we can literally, Martin has more Russian bot accounts that have voting cards in Longford that could get you in, like, you know.
Johnny, thank you so much for coming in and having a chat with us. It's interesting. We're in interesting times politically. I completely agree with you. The polls at the present moment in time, as soon as that election is called, watch a 20-point swing in an opposite direction. They can't be correct the way they are. They just can't. And if anything, the referendum polls tell us, and nobody has mentioned this much, they were way off. Mm-hmm. They were way off. Way off.
I disagree. I think the polling companies do a wonderful job. No, Johnny, cheers, mate. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on, and it was great to finally get you, drag you over to the north side, huh? Listen, folks, thanks for listening. We do need you guys to tell your friends and share the news. I know we keep saying it, but it actually makes a difference. Without that spread, word of mouth, the tweets and all of that adds value. It gives us it gives us a pickup. It even makes Martin smile from time to time. See you, folks. Take care. Bye bye.